On today's episode of the show, we explain why Louisville might be the sleeper team in the ACC for the second consecutive season. All that and more coming up on today's episode of the Locked On Louisville podcast.
You are Locked On Louisville, your daily podcast on the Louisville Cardinals. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Happy Tuesday, everyone. Welcome into another episode of the Locked On Louisville podcast. I'm your host, Dalton Pence. Today's episode brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more right now. New customers get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. That's $150 with any winning $5 bet. Visit FanDuel.com/locked on to get started today. And as always, I want to personally thank you all for making us your first listen of the day. Just a reminder, the Locked On Louisville podcast is available on all streaming services, free 5 days a week, your team every day. Is Louisville the top sleeper team in the ACC yet again? Well, an article released recently by 24/7 Sports would lead you to believe just that. We'll discuss. We'll also identify 3 requirements needed for the Cardinals to make the 12-team college football playoff in its inaugural season. So a lot of good football talk on the show today. We begin by discussing an interesting article released by Grant Hughes, staff writer for 247sports.com. He released an article on Sunday titled College Football Surprise Teams in 2024, Biggest Sleeper in SEC, Big Ten, ACC, and Big 12. Now, if you remember last year, especially at the end of the offseason-ish, sort of midway through the summer, Louisville started to pick up steam as the trendy sleeper pick in the ACC. And I remember on this show back in early August, late July, where we were breaking down odds on different services like FanDuel, who is the sponsor of today's show. And Louisville was like really rising in those rankings. And that makes you wonder because Vegas's odds are so interesting. You just wonder what they know. Now, Louisville went on to win 10 regular season games. They stumbled down the stretch. Still, they won 10 out of their first 11 games, and we're proved right that Louisville was the sleeper team in the ACC. They made their first ever conference championship game. But this season, Louisville it depends on who you talk to. Some believe that, yes, they will take the step forward. Others believe, well, when they played better competition, they faltered down the stretch. So it's one of those TBD type circumstances. But Grant Hughes of 24/7 Sports coined Louisville as the top sleeper team in the ACC. Just for a little bit of context, it was Arizona in the Big 12. It was Penn State in the Big 10. It was Tennessee in the SEC. Now, this publication is a little bit more of a combination of different things. Josh Pate, who is a very well-renowned podcast host. He hosts Late Kick, which is a popular show in college football. He disclosed his biggest sleeper teams. And I guess I should say that this is like determining who those teams are with some commentary from Hughes. So this is more so of Josh Pate speaking. But let's go ahead and read exactly what was said about Louisville. This is what Hughes had to say. Louisville hit the 10-win mark and made an ACC championship game appearance during Jeff Brohm's first season at the helm. The Cardinals aren't sneaking up on anyone thanks to the number 6 transfer portal class in the nation and landed at number 5 in our ACC power rankings. The Cardinals are a threat to finish higher, but making that call right now puts a lot of faith in quarterback Tyler Shough, a 6-year journeyman who has never thrown for more than 1,600 yards in a season. Josh Pate had this to say: Louisville has the 4th best odds to win the ACC. They're a total wild card this year. They landed a top 25 recruiting class. They added 32 kids in the portal. Their secondary is one of the best in the country. They've got Tyler Shough at quarterback. Louisville has a shot of being in the conversation at the end of the year. They have a date at Clemson on November 2nd. They've got Miami on October 19th. Miami and Clemson both have bye weeks before they play Louisville. The Cardinals do not have a bye week before they play either one of them. It's going to be tough, but we're not calling for them to go undefeated. This is a sleeper team to keep your eye on. Still fairly reasonable commentary there. I don't think that it was over-the-top praise, but I don't think that they were unrealistic in some of the concerns and questions that they have coming into the season. It's a whole new team for Louisville. Yes, you brought some players back like Ashton Gelati and Quincy Riley. You brought in one of the best transfer portal classes. Jeff Brohm is the head coach for another season, so there's a little bit of program continuity. Sorry. But again, new team has to show they can mesh well. More of an unforgiving schedule than it was last year. There's some more key matchups. You do play Clemson this season. You have less home games. Some of your road games are true road games rather than just either at neutral sites or NFL stadiums with not a great atmosphere in the college ranks. So there's some factors that are playing against you, and you do have a little bit larger of a target on your back because of your success last season. You're being focused on a little bit more. Are they a sleeper team? I guess really the topic list on the side is a bit misleading because we're talking about whether Louisville is the sleeper team versus a sleeper team. There's a difference, albeit small. There is still a difference. I do think that when you look at this team, it's fairly, it's fairly reasonable to consider them the sleeper team. I would suggest that they definitely could be, because to be a sleeper team, you have to not be considered to be in the top two, in my opinion. Now, Florida State and Clemson are probably, I wouldn't say unanimous, but you're overwhelmingly favored top two, and then you have Miami outside of them. I'm looking at some of the publications, and Louisville kind of really falls far down some of these lists. Like in a CBS Sports ACC post-spring power rankings by Chip Patterson of CBS Sports, he has Louisville all the way down at 6 under Virginia Tech, who the Cardinals beat fairly handily at Cardinal Stadium this past year, and NC State, that has sort of a newer team as well. They bring in Grayson McCall from Coastal Carolina. They bring back some key defensive players, but Louisville will not play NC State this upcoming season. They won't play Virginia Tech either. So the scheduling module and how things are working, it sort of strips you of some of those key matchups. So I think that there's a group in the ACC that you're looking at. I would say that your top two are probably Florida State and then Clemson. I think Miami, Virginia Tech, NC State, Louisville, and SMU are that group of 5 that you can pick the sleeper team from. Of those, maybe I'm a little bit biased. Miami might have a little bit more talent, but how often have they been able to put that together? They weren't able to do that under Manny Diaz. I'm not sure if they're going to be able to do that under Mario Cristobal. Now, granted, they do have one of the best transfer portal quarterbacks in Cam Ward, but Cristobal has had his fair share of issues trying to get a quarterback to play at the top of his game. Now, who knows what the reasoning behind that is, but Louisville went down into Miami last year and they defeated the Hurricanes. Now, they will have a chance to prove to the rest of the conference and the nation as a whole that they are the team. Let's look at this little 5-game stretch. Actually, it's sort of the middle part of the season, the 6-game stretch. You have at Notre Dame, home game against SMU, at Virginia, Miami at home, at Boston College, and at Clemson. You have 4 games really, that can determine your perception across the country. Assuming you start the season out 3-0 against Austin Peay, Jacksonville State, and Georgia Tech, which I believe you will, that 6-game stretch is going to be key. You open up at Notre Dame. You then have to turn around and play a good SMU team. Virginia on the road is always kind of a little sketchy for Louisville. Louisville always struggles at Virginia for some reason, so that's a game to focus on. Miami at home, at Boston College, at Clemson. The middle portion of this slate for the Cardinals is going to be the key. Are they the sleeper team? I would venture into saying yes, because what we are discounting is Jeff Brohm getting another season to form this roster the way that he wants it and bringing in more of his guys. I would argue that this transfer portal class is just as good, if not better overall than last year's. I think that you're going to have some improvements at the quarterback play. We went position by position just about a month ago, And there's really not one position that you look at and say, yeah, that they're not as good as they were a season ago. I think that there are some unproven guys that have to step up and take advantage of the opportunities at hand. But nonetheless, I find it hard to look at any one position group across the whole team and say, yeah, just not as good as last year. So we'll see what that looks like, right? But at this point, you have the team. It's not the easiest schedule, but it's doable to be the sleeper team in the ACC. And by sleeper, I'm assuming you're finishing in the top 3, potentially top 2 sleeper team to make the ACC championship. I just feel like Louisville is better equipped to make a run than, let's say, an NC State team that had some questions offensively last year, than a Virginia Tech team that we'll see if Kyron Drones is able to take that next step forward. SMU as well in their first season in the ACC. In Miami, who knows if they can put it together. So, but they do have the team to do so. It's going to be very interesting. Louisville has to handle business. I do wish they would have been able to play both Virginia Tech and NC State, but it just sort of is what it is with the new addition. So, yes, it is very reasonable and rational to consider Louisville to be the sleeper team in the ACC once again. With the trend starting to pick up and that's starting to get more steam, they've also become sort of a trendy, under-the-radar selection, dark horse to make the inaugural 12-team college football playoff. It's possible. I don't know about saying probable, but it's possible. However, there's more than 3, but the 3 requirements, like no negotiating here, like these 3 things have to happen for the Cardinals to make the playoffs. We'll discuss 2 here in the next segment. Both will pertain to on-the-field specifics. We'll identify here coming up shortly after we tell you about our friends and the title sponsor of the show, FanDuel. It's winner-take-all time in the NBA and NHL. FanDuel is giving you a shot to bring home a huge win of your own. If you go to FanDuel.com and look at all the odds, one thing that I love are the same-game parlays. Boston Celtics have been the overwhelming favorite, so I haven't really bet on the spread or even money line because not a ton of return on investment, but I'll get into the same-game parlays. Jaylen Brown and Jason Tatum have made me a good amount of money, not only in the Eastern Conference Finals, but the playoffs as a whole. Luka Doncic as well. Still some more basketball to be played, so if you are new, you can get $150 in bonus with any winning $5 bet. That's $150 to bet on spreads, money lines, player props, and more. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and make every playoff shot count. FanDuel is America's #1 sportsbook. Cardinal fans, once again, if you are watching Fox Sports or ESPN on your TV all day and you have to turn down the volume with all the shouting, you need to make the switch to Locked On Sports today. It's a free 24/7 sports streaming channel programmed for you every day to bring you the biggest stories without all the screaming. Locked On Sports Today brings you can't-miss analysis, opinions, and news, streaming 24/7 on YouTube or the free Amazon Fire TV channels app, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, covering your team every day. A lot has to go right for the Louisville Cardinals to make the inaugural 12-team college football playoff. But I have sort of broken it down into 3 verbatim have to happen non-negotiables. 2 of them are more specific in-game, on-the-field type requirements. The first one is centered around the quarterback play. Tyler Shuck, number 1, has to stay healthy, and number 2 has to give Louisville better quarterback play than last season. No disrespect to Jack Plummer. I feel like he came in and did what he was supposed to do, won Louisville 10 games, but the ceiling was limited. When I remember stating that if teams start to load the box and force Jack Plummer to throw the football, you sort of offer the Cardinals kryptonite. And what happened in the end of the season? Virginia laid out the blueprint. Miami, Kentucky, USC, they all did the same thing. They loaded the box. They dared Louisville to throw the football, and Jack Plummer, for whatever reason, it's not just on him, it's on the offensive line ability to protect him, receivers dropping passes, not able to create separation. It wasn't just a Jack Plummer issue, but I have to say that quarterback play has to be better this season. You have to have a quarterback that can raise the ceiling of your team because you have a tougher schedule. You have some tougher road games. At Clemson is going to be tough. The Cardinals have yet to beat the Tigers since joining the conference back in 2014. If Louisville is very good, if Clemson is very good, that could be a highly anticipated matchup that could be tough to play against. At Notre Dame. So those two matchups alone, you have a tougher schedule. Miami's going to be good. Kentucky's going to be respectable. Georgia Tech's going to be improved. You've got some challenging opposition on the schedule. I think hands down it's a tougher schedule than last season. I really don't even think you could argue that. I don't think you could argue the contrary. But quarterback play has to be better. Down the field, you have to be more explosive. Now, I think that running the football, you might take a little bit of a step back because replacing Jawar Jordan and Isaac Guerendo is easier said than done. But I look for Maurice Turner to take that next step forward. I'm interested to see what Don Chaney Jr. brings to the table. Isaac Brown, Kewan Brown, Duke Watson. You have a very, very good nucleus at the running back position. You brought in some solid transfers at the wide receiver spot. The tight end position is going to be vastly improved, and you're going to have a fairly respectable offensive line. So the pieces are in place. You have one of the brightest offensive minds in football. There have been rumors, no confirmed reports, but Jeff Brohm had to sort of not water down, but limit the playbook to fit the skill set of the quarterback. Jeff Brohm's offense should be able to expand a little bit more. The playbook gets larger. Tyler Shuck has to, number one, stay healthy, which he's had some trouble doing. Now, it's been more circumstantial, horrific luck type injuries than more lingering issues. But nonetheless, the best ability is and always will be availability. So he has to stay healthy. And number two, he has to play great through the season. He has to give Louisville better quarterback play than they got last year to not make the Cardinals one-dimensional. I think that if you do that, you challenge defenses, you bring more of a attractive style of offense on the field, and you'll win more games. Number two, you go to the defensive side of the ball. The pass rush has to be better. Losing Tyler Barron, it's really, really tough to deal with because of, at the moment, we don't really know the status of Mason Reiger. Don't want to speculate here, but there's a chance that he could miss a good amount of time. We don't really have any information with an undisclosed injury according to the program. Don't want to really speculate here, but at the moment, we're not necessarily so sure of how much Mason Reiger is going to be available. So theoretically, you're already down Tyler Barron. Now, you brought in some rotational guys like Miles Jernigan, Richard Kinley, some other players, but we'll see who's going to rush the passer opposite of Ashton Gelati. You bring back one of, if not the best player in all of the ACC. That's huge coming back for a senior season. You have to replace Stephen Herron. Can you do that by committee? Yes, but there were at times last season, especially down the stretch, that when the pass rush didn't get home, the secondary got exposed a little bit more than we're used to than what they did early on in the season. Now, personnel-wise, I think the secondary is better. You bring MJ Griffin back. You have a great portal class coming in. Quincy Riley is back for his final season. Your linebacking core is pretty much what you know it to be from last year, and it's going to improve with the guys returning. One thing different is I think that there's going to be a little bit more of interior pressure because Des Tell and Jared Dawson are back. Also, Thor Griffith, one of the best defensive linemen in all of college football, will be on Louisville's trenches or in Louisville's trenches next season. Nonetheless, Adonijah Green, TJ Capers could be relied upon to make some big-time levels of improvement. But the second requirement is fairly straightforward. You have to have a menacing pass rush. You have to be able to get after the quarterback because if you do not, you're going to make your secondary, possible or open to some big-time passing. I mean, you can only give a quarterback so much time to throw, and if you allow him to get out of the pocket and run, or you allow him enough time to be able to sit through the pocket, make his reads, go through his progressions, and hit the second or third read, then you're going to struggle all throughout the defense. So, number one, you have to be better at quarterback. Again, this is not a slight to Jack Plummer whatsoever. I appreciate him for what he did. But to make the college football playoff, the 12 team, you have to have better quarterback play. And you have to have, I think, overall a better pass rush. And I'm really not even looking at Ashton Gelati at the moment. I'm looking at the other players because we know what Gelati's going to bring to the table. And we know the teams are going to try to plan around him. So there's going to be opportunity all over the defensive line to be able to, attack those mismatches. And it's critical that the Cardinals do so. So you bring that all together, and what do you have? Well, you have improved play on the field. But how much improvement, how much level of success is necessary to crack into that 12-team playoff? And I think that there is a very, very solid threshold in terms of success parameters. And I'm going to tell you what my thoughts are here in just a moment. Before we do that, again, I want to take this time to personally thank you all for making us your first listen of the day. Just a reminder that the show is free on all streaming services, including YouTube, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, WHAS 11 Sports, and more. Whatever streaming service you utilize, it is on there. I appreciate everyone for tuning in, making the show your first listen, liking, subscribing, sharing, rating the podcast on all streaming services. No matter what, you are definitely appreciated. But continuing the conversation of the three non-negotiable requirements for the Louisville Cardinals to make the playoffs in 2024 in the inaugural 12-team playoff, you have to have better quarterback play. You have to have a better pass rush overall. You have to at least win 10 games. Here's my thought process here. The schedule is more challenging, so you're playing some better teams. You won't be talked about a ton as having a horrible schedule, but you don't have one of the toughest schedules in the country. I'd say it's respectable. I truly would. The ACC's perception around the nation could not be any worse at the moment. We are coming off of a season to where Florida State just went 13-0 and did not make the college football playoff. The first time that's ever happened. The first time an undefeated Power 5 team has never made a BCS national championship, a 14 college football playoff, you name it. Does Jordan Travis's availability have an impact on that? Yeah, of course it does. And do you think that Florida State would have been able to compete with the likes of Michigan, Alabama, or Texas, or Washington in the mix with a third-string quarterback? Probably not, but it's the principle. It's the optics. It's that the ACC just had a 13-0 team in, and they did not make it, regardless of what your thoughts on if they were worthy or not. They were an undefeated team. Now, I'm not sitting here trying to reopen or rehash that argument. I'm just merely stating that they went undefeated and didn't make the playoff. So the perception and the image of the ACC across the country, it's as low as it could be. And that is really, really challenging for a team like Louisville, who at the last weekend of the year, they were 10-1. And they ended up losing to Kentucky. I understand that. But they had 10 wins in the regular season up until the last week. And they were sort of on the outside looking in. Now, granted, if they would have went 12-1, they probably still wouldn't have made the college football playoff. Now, there are 12 teams this year to where if you went 12-1, you definitely make it. But Louisville went 10-3. Now, granted, they ended up losing their last 3 games. Actually, it was 10-4. But going into bowl season, 10-3, they really weren't even in the top 12. They were sort of at the back end of it, in the late teens. So it begs the question, does it matter of when they lose? If they were to lose early and they end up sort of ripping off the streak to win games, does that sort of change your level of rankings? I really am not sure there. The truth of the matter is that the Cardinals need to win at least 10 games, and even then, that might not necessarily be enough help. It really just depends on what happens. You go 10-3, you lose in the ACC championship game, then you're going to be in a weird spot because you have to assume that the Big Ten, the SEC will have the majority of the teams in there. And there is obviously, the 5 conference championship winners and then the at-large teams. if Louisville wins the ACC at 10 wins, then it doesn't matter because they're in. But you assume at this point that we're operating under the assumption that Louisville could get to the ACC championship, but hypothetically, for this situation, they're not going to win it at the moment. Let's just say that. Let's say they're an at-large team. So you have about 7 spots. There are going to be some teams like Alabama and Georgia both can't win the SEC championship. So there are some slots. A lot of the SEC teams are going to get in. Some Big Ten teams are going to get in. Ohio State, Michigan both can't get in. And then there's Oregon, there's Washington, there's a bunch of teams out there that are going to be right in the mix. So for Louisville to get to a spot where you can for sure say, yeah, they're going to make the college football playoff. They're going to have at least 10 wins. There's not a lot of room for error. You could suggest that they can't have more than 2 losses. So 11-2, you make the conference championship game, then you lose the ACC game. Then I think that you're still in. If you're just at 10 wins, if you win 10 games, it's probably inferred that you're making the conference championship unless, you lose 2 conference games. You're not playing Florida State in the regular season this year. Maybe you lose to Clemson. Florida State wins all but 1 or 2. Clemson loses 1. Maybe it's Miami. But for the most part, I think Louisville winning 10 games would get you into that conference championship game. If you're sitting at 10-3, let's say that you literally have a replication of what happened last year. If that happens, then personally for me, I think you need a little bit of help. It depends on what happens. It depends on how the cookie crumbles. But nonetheless, I think that that's one of the requirements. Those are the 3 requirements for me. Now, those aren't the only 3. I mean, you need some help. I think that you need to get some big-time wins. I think that beating Notre Dame on the road would be key. Beating Miami would be key. Beating Clemson would be key. If you can – but then if you're winning those 3 and you end up winning 10 regular season games, it depends on who the other 2 you lose to. Like if you lose to, let's say, I don't know, SMU and Kentucky, but you win Clemson, Miami, and Notre Dame, I think that your resume looks a lot better than if you were to only have lost to Notre Dame or Clemson, in my opinion, because you have the top wins and you lose to fairly respectable opposition rather than you might lack the top tier wins, but you don't really have any perceived bad losses. So there's a couple different ways to look at this, but in the grand scheme of things, yes, Louisville does not have much room for error, and it might not necessarily be as much fault of their own, but it's just how reality is at the moment. It's how the ACC is being viewed. There will be some 9-win SEC teams that people will try to push in over 10-11 win ACC, Pac-12 teams, or whatever the hell that conference is going to be called now. Maybe even Big 12, because right now the Big 12 is sort of lacking those top teams with no Oklahoma and Texas. So we'll see exactly what happens, but that's sort of my take on the matter. I'm interested to hear what you all think. How many wins does Louisville need to get to the 12-team college football playoff? Drop a comment in the section below. That's going to wrap up this Tuesday edition of the show. Everyone have a great day. We'll see you right back here